what brought you to this realization that I need to kind of work with or look at my inner masculine? So we'll just start from there if that feels good.
Yeah. Thanks for asking too. It's something that I hadn't thought about sharing a lot. So I think it was around 2012-ish. I was working in an unfulfilling job. My son and I were living with my parents. I was also very single. I was studying different healing modalities and focusing on my spiritual growth. But I was so unfulfilled and not happy, very overweight, sad, depleted, all of those things. And I had no idea what I actually needed and no idea what I actually wanted out of life. And then no idea how to go about actually finding those things. So I was sort of felt kind of helpless and didn't know how to create the momentum I felt like I needed. I knew something that I wanted something different, and I knew that it wasn't part of like my past experience or something that you learn really growing up. I just knew I needed something different. So I began asking God or my higher self. I tend to go directly to my higher self rather than just saying, hey, anybody help me? Yeah. I want to make sure it's coming from what's for my highest and best good. And I've sort of established what I believe God is for myself now. But that's essentially who I was talking to. So it was a dark fall night in November, cold, and I went out to the water and I was just asking for clarity about how to become more who I am. What was my higher purpose? What am I called for? Who am I? Those those questions, finding myself kind of thing. And then all I could do was really surrender because I didn't know where to find the answer. And I had a response, which was kind of surprising to me. And part of me felt like I was just like a little bit delusional. But I could hear one word in the back of my mind. And it started with an A and it ended with an S, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And I had an old boyfriend whose name started with an A, ended with an S. And that's all so I couldn't decipher what the word really was. And I was listening to different podcasts at the time, mostly around like sexuality and pleasure. Looking back, I think I was trying to ignite something within myself intuitively. And it was looking at the masculine, the feminine, and Jung's animus and anima. And I heard the word animus. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's that word that's sitting in the back of my mind. It's the animus.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So wait, can you when was this again? Was it 2010?
I think it was 2012.
Okay.
It could have been 2011 or 2013, but I'm going back in my brain. I think it was around 2012.
2012. I remember when you and I first talked about it, and I was just so in awe because, gosh, I mean, so that I was like, oh my God, that was almost close to when my son was born a long time ago. And wow. So this is like this whole conversation about masculine, feminine, has, I feel like, only recently come into popular culture. And so when I heard that date for you, I was like, wow, I was actually very impressed. I was like, that is really so cool. Like she's such a like early, an early adopter, if you will, of this technology, that has become into more of a mainstream way. And I certainly wasn't in touch with that back then. My son had just been born and I was kind of a hot mess back then. So
Uh,
definitely hadn't started my journey of reclaiming my feminine or looking at my masculine at all. So this is incredible. Okay. So for people
mhm.
who might not be familiar with Carl Jung's concept of animus, do you want to just briefly share?
Sure. I do have a couple notes here that I wrote about it just because um, so that I could articulate it essentially.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like I didn't know this really like conceptually or
Mhm.
thoughtfully until I went back to do this. I didn't, it's almost like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I
Right.
knew, but I didn't know.
Yeah, like you hadn't really like developed an intellectual sort of understanding
Exactly.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's incredible.
So when I went back and looked, so Carl Jung's work revolved around the shadow, and we all know a lot about the shadow work and the path to individuation. The shadow is a big part of that, where we're looking at aspects of ourselves that we kind of want to deny, and when we're accepting them. And so when I was looking at this, the way he saw it was that the shadow work was an apprentice to the development of the anima and the animus. So the anima and the animus is essentially the master in the process of individuation, according to Jung.
Hmm.
And so the animus, the anima is the feminine aspect. So the men, essentially men, would want to develop their anima in order to become fully individuated. And women would want to develop their animus in order to become fully individuated. And once those are embodied, and I was going to talk about this closer to the end, but once those are embodied, it's like it's a soul embodiment of the opposite. And then you can actually be more feminine or be more masculine because you've at a soul core level, you already have embodied the opposite. So that the unity comes into play. And I don't know if I'm articulating this well, because it's for me more of a feeling.
Katrina, oh my gosh. I'm getting so excited just hearing you. I'm like, yes, 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 yes. I'm so,
Yes.
thank you for explaining that to people. And so, in my work, a lot of people know that I talk about divine union, but for me, divine union starts with inner union. And so like
Yeah.
I've been working a lot with inner union in my personal life, also with clients. And so it really is, it's the balance of both. And it's so fascinating because I see with the rise of masculine feminine teachings or polarity teachings that there, especially women, have been very encouraged to only embody their feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no talk about the inner balance of both. And in fact, that's almost discouraged. And so, in a way, some of my colleagues that I've been talking about with this, some people, including myself, I don't have it all figured out, but I do think that there's some distortions in the way
Yeah.
it's being taught. But anyway, so I'm getting very excited and you did a beautiful job explaining that. So, okay, so
Yeah.
you
Thank
stumbled
you.
upon that information and then what did you do?
Um, so when I stumbled upon the information and the animus, and I understood that it was the masculine, um, I thought that meant I had to find a man. Like I wasn't yet understanding that was part of my inner process. So, but that's okay. So I started looking at what came up was twin flames, which I don't necessarily recommend because and I found a couple, a man and a woman, who were working together, coaching, and they had been looking at the twin flame, but their perspective was different, and there was a healthier perspective, is the best word I can find, of what this was. And slowly they actually moved away from the twin flame movement. But they were students of a man named Nathan Martin. He eventually, I started working with him directly, and he is more an embodiment of the masculine principle. And so, okay, there's a bunch of things that were happening simultaneously. I was learning about embodiment, where I was tuning into the center of my body. So anytime I felt anything that was off, I basically learned to not take things personally by staying centered. And anytime I would get emotional or something would happen that I felt off, I would come back to the center of my body and come back to my body. Again, I didn't really understand embodiment at the time, but I had this practice that I had learned through heart intelligence and the art of feminine presence. So they both had similar concepts. I still didn't fully understand the process, but you know how you don't get it intellectually until years later. And then you're like, oh yeah, I get that now. So I had that practice, and then I had come across the work of Michael Tsarian, who's a very truth. He says it as it is, and his concepts really ring true for me. He talks about the dragon mother, and it can be kind of harsh, but I was ready for what was true, not being having my insecurities nurtured. That was really clear to me. I grew up having my insecurities nurtured, and I knew I just needed truth. And Mark Passio. So are you familiar with
Mark Passio? Yes. Oh my gosh. Have you watched his presentation called The Unholy Feminine?
I'm not 100% sure if I have, but probably. I've looked at so much of his stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure like he's probably talked about some of those concepts as well, but I love Mark Passio, and in the show notes we can give people links to different things that we're talking about.
Yeah. I went right back to the first of his podcasts, and then the second one he talked about the brain, the left and right brain, and the imbalance. So do you want me to go into detail about that, or?
Yeah, I would love. Okay, so let's just riff a little bit, because yes, Mark Passio talks a lot about the what I would call, I don't know if he uses the word divine union, but it really is like the left and the right brains, with the left brain being more rational, logical. This is super overgeneralization, but then the right right, the right side is kind of more of the feminine, of the intuitive, creative, and so he talks about the unification of both.
Yes. Yeah. And exactly. So he talks about that. But what really stuck out for me was he was talking about how most of the population has been taken over by one or other side. So they're predominantly either left brain or predominantly right brain. So this is what really made the click for me, that I was working on my own personal growth, not looking for a man outside of me. Yes. And yeah, and it relates to the anima and the animus. There's masculine, feminine, left brain, right brain. It pulled a whole bunch of things that I got really excited about anyway. It pulled them together for me and made me see where I was at personally.
Isn't it so wild how like we just stumble upon these things, and then all of a sudden like the puzzle pieces all fit together and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
it's a beautiful thing.
It's okay. So you had this realization that, all of this was coming together, that it was internal work that you had to do. And so from there, what did you start to do? How did you approach this inner work?
A lot of it was really intuitively guided. So, I mean, I had already started the embodiment work because I knew it was significant. I was working with Nathan Martin. So his work, just very logical. He was embodying that masculine principle for me, so I could see what it actually looked like. I learned about the trivium. So grammar, logic, rhetoric, and moved through my emotions and different processes using those three, that concept of the trivium.
Mhm.
And he teaches a lot about that. I looked at logical fallacies, standards, boundaries, more recently, affirmations, 0 point, and natural law, which Mark Passio also talks a lot about natural law. And I looked at that and moved into a place where, it all comes down to do not steal. So
Mhm.
am I stealing in every moment? Am I being manipulative and stealing something from somebody, or am I being true and honest and on the right hand path?
Oh my
I
gosh.
don't know how to explain like where it all came from or how I was like guided there. It just happened.
Yeah, this is really fascinating because I also had to do a process of integration of my inner masculine,
Mhm.
as well, after I went down the path of deeply, deeply reclaiming my relationship with my feminine and really just healing that for a
Mhm.
good 3 years, and was very immersed in that world. But then I came up and out and remembered that I had to integrate and like have a balance. That
Yeah,
became very clear to me. And it wasn't that someone told me, it just was an intuitive thing that I just knew that felt really right for me. And,
right.
on some level, it's kind of like, I was just thinking about this in preparation for our podcast today. It might sound like simple or obvious or whatever, but I don't understand how you wouldn't like why you wouldn't want to do this if you think about overall balance and wholeness, and even the visual of the yin and the yang, right? Like,
Yeah,
why aren't more people drawn to being whole internally?
yeah.
um like, why? And I mean, I'm just kind of riffing here a little bit, but what I do know is that when I was in that deep healing process of really reclaiming my feminine, I actually did not want any it's so funny, I didn't want to learn from any masculine men teachers. I
Mhm.
actually, even the music that I listened to was like only women. I was very like, I like only wore dresses, so I had to be really immersed in that served a purpose. And then I came up and out, right? And I feel much more balanced now. But and so with your process too, when you were sort of integrating the masculine side, did you feel, did you maintain your balance through that, or was it kind of like tipped over here and okay, I'm gonna like be in the masculine a little bit more?
I think I went back and forth a little bit because I would go out into the world and be a little more like wear skirts, wear more flowy outfits. But you know what? I wore a lot of black at certain points too. And just like dress pants. And I had like what I called a uniform, which was like black pants, a black undershirt, like a shirt underneath, and then something over top, a
Yeah.
sweater or whatever. But it was very kind of more structured and maybe even masculine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but that I I was hiding my feminine is when I think about it. And
Mm.
even like in the gaining of weight, I feel like I was hiding maybe my feminine now
That
that I
okay,
think.
that's interesting. Yeah. Let's actually, can we talk about that for just a moment? Like,
I would love to.
so yeah, why do you think that you were hiding your feminine? What comes to mind?
Okay, so kind of going back to the Mark Passio podcast about, so he talks about, if you're more left brain, you're more the master, the dominant, you want more power. So when you're imbalanced on the left, that you shut down your emotional centers and are more like coming from the reptilian brain.
Mm.
When you're more right brain imbalanced, you're more a slave, you're more passive, you're more a doormat essentially.
Mhm.
And so that was my recognize what I recognized was that I was in that right brain place. And you're making me like put pieces together, because when it comes to relationship with men, even I needed to protect myself because I was in that passive state.
Right. This is so fascinating because just yesterday I recorded a podcast episode with Dr. George Simon, who is an expert on the narcissist empath dynamic, which is exactly what you're just saying. It's like another way to describe the power imbalance of what you just described. Power
Please give
over and
me,
then the doormat. Yeah.
yeah. And
So,
yeah, yeah. And an unhealthy animus is that narcissist. Yeah.
right. Oh my gosh, I'm getting chills as we're talking because it's just I hope people are starting to see the importance um of overall balance. It's not just like a trendy catchphrase in like new age circles, right? To be balanced or whole. Like this is actually pretty like serious spiritual study to do this, or into spiritual practice, I should say, to do this, because it's really, really big. And when you think about the overall power dynamics that are happening, where we just talked yesterday about the rise of narcissism and people with these character disorders, it's like the numbers are showing that that's on the rise. And yet there's this whole other group of people who are very passive. And so it's very polarized right now. And so if we're going to evolve collectively, we need to bridge the divide here to not have such extremes out there. Right. And so like you just said, like it comes to like the inner work, it comes back to the inner work that we each do, because we have to get out of this cycle of power over other people. It
Yeah.
has to stop.
Yeah. Win-win instead of win-lose. That's what it feels like. There's this battle to win, and it's like, why can't everybody win?
Right. Exactly. And so like you were doing this inner work, and about how long, I was just going to ask you how long it took, but are you still doing it, or did you feel like you reached a certain level of completion?
Well, that's kind of like probably like 3 months ago, 4 months ago, not that I have to be that specific, but very recently, I felt the divine feminine come back. And then through working with Laura and Bernard in the Embodied Soul Awakening course, Laura put a piece together for me, talking to somebody else, but where I realized that I'm still doing the work. I'm always going to be doing the work, I think, but I recognized that I have embodied that divine masculine to a degree that my divine feminine came back
Yeah.
more fully.
Oh, I love this. And so do you think that because you have really developed your own inner masculine, that allows you internally to hold your feminine for her to be more fully expressed?
I do.
Yeah. I mean, this is so huge.
Yes,
This is
it
so
is.
huge. I hope that women are listening and understanding that. And let's just actually for a moment talk about like what would it look like if you did sort of fall prey to all of this polarity talk, and like women are only supposed to be in their feminine 100% of the time,
Yes.
totally either trying to play some kind of a part or a role, which I have done that in the past, I'll just say,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't work. But we all learn our lessons. But if you're a woman who's embodying 100% of your feminine, acknowledging that we're all on our own paths and it's all good in the end, but what that might look like is that you have no structure. Your life might be, you're just following your flow and your intuition, and just like kind of like a leaf in the wind. And just your life it's not rooted. You're not sort of like grounded. What would you share that might look like?
I love that you asked this question, because I was thinking about this as you were talking earlier. And I recently joined a Facebook group, which I don't usually do. And it's about polarity. And I see women asking these questions about, how do I appreciate my man? What do I say in these situations? And when they're dating, kind of thing. And there's a weakness to it. And I don't mean, no, I do mean to be blunt. So this is the masculine coming and saying there needs to be boundaries. It creates boundaries. There's a strength. So when a fully feminine woman is able to express that, there's also this knowing that she is not weak.
Yeah.
She is confident. So that masculine underneath at the soul level, when there needs to be boundary, it's like an intuitive hit of something's not right. I need to set a boundary. So it shows up when it needs to, and then it relaxes again when it's safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's like, it's the beautiful combination of having a warm, open, loving heart.
Yeah.
And knowing when to, number one, have discernment, right?
Yes.
To be able to survey and judge people's character. And then also when you're involved, to be able to know how to set boundaries. And so like, that's such a, and that's okay, because it's sort of like, you can sort of close and open as you need to.
Mm-hmm.
That's another lie I think that women are fed. In order to be fully feminine, you need to just like have your walk around the world with your heart open. And you know what, we don't live in a world where that's safe.
It's
And
not
so
safe.
people, I wish we did, right? But like, the reality is that if you do that, you will get taken advantage of. And so these, and it's so crazy, because it's happening all for a reason. Because if we didn't have this opportunity to bring in the inner masculine qualities, bring in the boundaries, the discernment, this is our opportunity as women to become whole, or at a soul level to become whole.
Soul level.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's that inner union, right? And in my opinion, that inner union is important to then bring that masculine manifestation into your life. So
yeah,
not that I know what that's like yet, but
so this is okay. So this is key here. So what Katrina is saying here is that when you work on developing this inner union inside of you, it actually causes on the external for you to then attract in a partner who can meet you exactly where you are. And it's finally a healthy dynamic.
Yeah.
This
You're
is
going to magnetize somebody. Well, my hope is, my gut feel is that, and I'm still in transition, so I haven't seen that manifestation, but my gut says that, like attracts like you're going, at the same time it's opposite, right? You're going to find that polarization when you're fully embodying the feminine.
exactly
With that masculine core. Yeah.
Oh, this is so good for people to understand, because, and this is where I feel like advanced polarity comes in, because the way it's being taught at a sort of beginner level is a little bit, it is basically saying, okay, women, you just be in your feminine. Men, you just be in your masculine. Will that create polarity? Of course it will. But then it also creates power differentials and the dominant submissive, narcissist empath thing, all of these pairings that we see, codependency, all of the stuff that doesn't ever have good outcomes. And so I love, actually, I am a fan of David Data's work. I think I don't love all of it, but what I do talk about a lot is his 3 stages of relationships. Do you know about those?
I'm familiar with David Data, but I don't know details.
So this is actually so relevant to what you and I are talking about, because we're talking about what he would label stage 3 relationships, where stage 1 would be very old school, traditional, like he's in his masculine, she's in the feminine. That's how it should be, rigid roles. There was polarity, but it created all sorts of, problems, right? Power differentials. And then stage 2 is moving into, I guess you could say we're kind of there now, where men and women are the same and we're equal. And there's like a minimization of the masculine and the feminine energies and knowing how to work with them to polarize. And so that usually leads to relationships that don't have that spark or the sexual friction.
Yeah.
And now we have this opportunity to move into stage 3, which is like kind of taking the best of both worlds. You know how to work with polarity very, very consciously without fixed dogmatic roles, but you know how to dance with it to create sexual friction when you need to. But the ultimate thing in stage 3 is the integration for both partners of the masculine and the feminine inside. And so it's the pairing of that, the man who has, done the work to reclaim the healthy masculine, but also has heart. And then the woman who has done the work that you and I are talking about today. So this is something where we haven't even really scratched the surface of this yet, but I'm excited. Like this is what's possible
Me
for
too.
us.
Yeah. There's so much more to talk about too. I'm like, as you're talking, I'm just thinking like, so like you came about it from a different way where you were more focused on the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
I was more focused on the masculine. I mean, at different points, and maybe then it changed and shifted. But then for women to know, what do they really need to be working with, and how to identify, and when do I need to develop my feminine? When is my animus, they call it animus possession. When am I possessed by my animus, which creates that power and that need for power? And when am I needing to step up my feminine? Like how do they know? And maybe this is work that you've already kind of put out there. How do they know what they need to develop?
It is such a good question, because I think what I'm one of the things I'm working on, so many different things in the work I do, but one of the things is I want to create kind of like an assessment to see that someone can take to see, okay, like where am I at with my masculine feminine balance? And maybe what are some of the things I know I'm really strong and healthy in, and what are the areas where I need to maybe develop a little bit more. And so that's kind of like my dorky, like assessment side of me, right? I know you work with
Masculine.
assessments too. It is masculine.
Yeah.
It is masculine.
But it's
Um,
necessary, right?
right. Because I don't actually know that sort of exists, because the way that I have been working is really the opposite pole of being very intuitive with people. Like, and we do a lot of like breath work, and it is actually a lot more feminine. So I was like thinking about bringing this data piece in to kind of balance it out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But I think
Exactly.
this is such ripe time for people, because there's so much interest in just these energetics of masculine, feminine. I go into the grocery store and I hear people talking about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so wild. And so I'm glad that there's so much interest in it. But yeah, what I would say to people is start to familiarize yourself with, what are these energetics, whether you want to call them masculine or feminine, yin, yang, right brain, left brain, right? Like really start to learn about from a variety of different maybe paths, and start to study it. My whole thing is like I've kind of had this longing of what is the pure essence of the masculine and the feminine. Like how far back do we need to go to get the pure essence of it, right? Because a lot of what we're taught about these energetics is like from religion or whatever it is, right? Like we're programmed a certain way, but like where did that actually come from? Do you have any thoughts about that?
The thought that was going through my brain is we're looking at it from more the masculine, where we're identifying it and naming it and labeling it, but you're talking about the essence, and that feels more like a feeling.
Yeah, like a download or something spiritual where like you get the
Yeah.
template of it.
Yeah. And well, what's coming up for me is that a man working with a fully embodied feminine woman, like in a coaching almost arrangement, or where they get to experience that. And that was part of my experience, was working with sometimes couples and then working with the divine masculine in an actual physical man, and how that experience was very healing because I got to witness
Huge, huge. Okay, this is good because this is another thing too, where like when I think about facilitating our inner union,
Mm-hmm.
you can do the inner work like single, solo by yourself. But I also feel like in partnership, you can actually both develop your inner union
Yeah.
more because you have an example, especially if you know how to not be dogmatic and like and flow a little bit. If you do have a really masculine man who has embodied his healthy masculine, then you um in partnership, that can rub off on you. You have a model of what that is, right?
Yeah. The
What it
healing.
Right. It's so healing. And it also
Oh,
allows you to drop into your feminine, like the depths of the feminine to explore deeper than you've ever gone before, which was my experience too in relationship.
yeah.
But yeah, so like thinking about like in relationship with a partner, what are your thoughts about developing inner union?
It- I'm going to speak from what's kind of coming up. And it's something I've been wondering about and questioning, because looking out into the dating world, I see a lot of really wounded adults. And there's part of me, and I might have spoken to you about this already, but there's part of me that's like, how do we heal when nobody can sit in unconditional love for each other? We just go around rejecting each other because you're not what I really need. You're not what I really deserve. You don't value me. But how does the healing of the wound happen if nobody's sitting there in acceptance and unconditional love? And I mean, part of what I've been exploring is being able to sit in that unconditional love for somebody as they're going through whatever they're going through, understanding that it's not personal to me. And I think because of this core masculine principle that I feel like is integrating, let's say I'm in the process of integrating it, I don't have to take it personally when somebody else is wounded.
Mm-hmm.
I may not be in the best of situations, but I can still be open-hearted and loving and understand where they're coming from.
Right.
So there's this like potential to really, really heal when you have two people. First, somebody like you become secure, you've have that inner union yourself, and then you bring somebody in who is also working towards that.
100%. And like
Okay.
this also takes me to like the whole one of the things that Laura Matsu and Bernhard and I share, is this perception of using a relationship as a catalyst for evolutionary
Yeah.
growth and potential. And so on a very basic level in relationship, all of our stuff tends to come up. And a lot of people tend to either run the other way or
Yeah.
get mad at each other. But it's actually, if you can turn towards each other with love
Mm-hmm.
and know, number one, okay, this is happening. Like we have an understanding from the get-go that all of our stuff is going to come up. And so we
Yeah.
work with it in a container of love and support for each other to be
Yeah.
able to heal. And so like that's a huge aspect. And then when you layer on top of the conversation about the masculine and the feminine, there's absolute potential to do that as well when you're working. This is why I like to kind of have a balance of like conscious relationship principles, which is like what we're talking about in terms of like using it to grow and evolve together, but then
Mm-hmm.
also the masculine feminine polarity in terms of the way I teach it, not dogmatically, but in a more healing way. So
Mm-hmm.
you can do both because there's like so much there that you can work on. But yes, the
Yeah.
inner union part is key. And so I love what you share about having unconditional love for somebody. This is again where I see the balance come up because I think that women, we tend to give that as our medicine,
Mm-hmm.
or at least you could argue that maybe that's the predominant way that women do.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is what I was talking about yesterday with Dr. George Simon, because he's worked with character disordered and narcissistic people for over 40 years. And I don't love labels, but I'm actually starting to kind of accept that there is definitely a truth to this dynamic that I can't ignore anymore. And that whole thing came up when I realized, oh my gosh, 80% of my clients have actually been caught up in that dynamic. So I had to just get really truthful about it. But anyway, so we were talking about how when you actually are in relationship with people who you might categorize as narcissists, they actually, this is even something I'm currently still digesting, but they actually need more of the boundaries and the tough love and the limits, which you could argue is loving. I would argue that's loving, rather than the acceptance, or what would you say, a more passive approach. They actually need that to grow and become better people. That's the medicine, versus people who are more on the empathic side. In order to heal, they need more of the unconditional love, that space of like real acceptance to heal. So it's fascinating, the different approaches.
Well, you can still have acceptance within boundaries, right?
Yes. And so that's the union too, because we were talking about that. I was like, okay, I said something like loving boundaries, right, in our conversation yesterday. And he was like, I love that, because it's both.
Right.
It's the integration of both, which is so key. And so I think people don't really know how to do both
either.
Yeah, it's like it's either one or the other.
Yeah, extremely. Yeah, or yes.
Okay, so I mean, you and I could obviously, we could talk for hours and hours, but just to bring it down to like a real practical level, would you mind sharing? So like, as you've done this work to cultivate your healthy inner masculine, what are the practical things you've noticed? Like, what has shifted in your life?
So I started really noticing I was integrating this, which I obviously didn't really realize what I was integrating until afterwards. But probably about 2 years ago, where in my work, I would be in meetings and I'm asking for people to provide clarity, to be honest, to really state what they mean. Because it's amazing, in a corporate setting, I would be sitting there, we'd have a full conversation. It started out as we'd have a full conversation. Everybody would be like, yep. I'd be like, okay, I have no idea what's going on, but everybody else seems to understand. So, okay. And I'd let it go. Nobody knew what was going on. It appeared like a bunch of word salad. Somebody had an idea. It was so complicated that nobody else really got it, and nothing would happen. And so I noticed that, started to get frustrated. Then I started to ask clarifying questions in the meeting. Once I started doing that, I started having people come to me to find out what was going on, because they're still not asking the questions. And so but in that, because I'm not a huge talker, I'm more of an observer. I just never, that was the passive part of me, I guess. I'm not that so much anymore. So that's one of the things, is that I speak up. Especially when I see like that there's chaos or misunderstanding, it's like, well, why don't you ask them for clarity? I don't understand. And that's what I started doing. And I felt like I was watching myself behave in a way that was really, really uncomfortable for me. So initially I was observing myself, being clear, being logical, and I was freaking out a little bit over here, because I felt like I was coming across as more aggressive than I wanted to come across as. But nobody ever expressed it that way. So now it's even more logical, especially in the business setting, when the needs of the business are primary and we just need to actually accomplish something.
Right. Yeah, this is really, I'm glad you shared this, because even as I'm listening to you, I actually don't fully know how to integrate logic and intuition. I've had a resistance to
Hmm.
logic, and I know why. I know why. So my ex-husband, who, he's a great guy. We're all good now. But when we were together, he actually studied logic and how to like make arguments and stuff. And I am not good at that. And so I was
Hmm.
very much, we were like very polar. I was like very like intuitive, emotional, right? And so we really clashed a lot. And so when you speak about logic, I have a reaction.
You like,
I, I like have a
so you know what that part of me was doing, because I
yes,
was like, what's happening?
right. Okay. So like, yeah. So like, how can we work with logic and intuition together?
I feel like because, well, there's two things that are coming into my mind. So it's important to also do a lot of the emotional clearing, so you don't have a lot of emotional debris
Yeah.
in
Right.
order to find logic.
Yes. Yes.
So emotional hygiene is a big, big part of that. Then you have logic. It's like my intuition is heightened when something's wrong.
Mm,
So the logic comes in not to be right, but because something's not clear. And
yes.
that to me is an intuitive hit.
Yes. Beautiful.
So it's like a red flag, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
So my discernment, and I need to have discernment right now where I am in my life. I need to be discerning.
Mhm. Right. Okay. I love that. That's a beautiful way of describing it.
That answers your
That's
question,
a
do you think?
beautiful way of describing it. So like just this is clearly something that I want to lean more into as well, because that's just like you said, a little bit of the cleanup around the stuff with the relationship, and I could be playful with it and it's all good. But yes, and also it's a good way to work with people to be able to maybe like when you do get an intuitive hit, if you're working or needing to communicate something to somebody that doesn't like speak that language, right? Like if they
Mm.
don't like buy it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh, I just got like an intuitive download and this is what it is. Like you need to be able to explain it to them and so
yeah,
that they can hear it. And so that's like
yeah,
very, very useful as well.
yeah.
Um, okay, so can we talk a little bit about romantic relationships right now? Are you open?
Let's. I'm
Okay.
I'm I'm very open to that.
So
Because I
I'm
learned something in every conversation.
okay, good. And like, yes, we can always like that.
Yeah.
We can clip whatever you want if
Okay.
it's like too personal. But since you've done this work, right? Since you become a more integrated woman, have you noticed that there's changes in terms of the types of people that you attract?
I've noticed a difference in the type of people. I can really evaluate where I'm at based on who I'm attracting. But I've noticed a major increase in men being more attracted at all.
Oh,
So
wow.
like organically, not just. So that's one thing that has shifted, is that it's more available, but I also think I was protecting myself from that.
Hmm.
So that's where my discernment is important.
Right.
I think I can tell when somebody is more authentic. I can still be majorly fooled
Mm,
because I am like more attracted to that masculine energy, but I'm learning to discern when it's true masculine energy and when it's more narcissistic, maybe.
yeah. Right.
I'm
That
not sure I'm really clear on that. That's
Well, I would say that if you zoom out and look at the collective patterns, there's kind of a truth right now that has been spoken about so often recently about this crisis of masculinity. And there's just a truth to the fact that men are really grappling with this.
yeah,
And so they need to be, which is great. Like I'm such a proponent of men's work. I will have,
yeah,
send resources all day long to people. And I also have a son, so I care very deeply about this. But there is a truth to the fact that just with the numbers of men who have actually truly, done the work like, who even knows what healthy masculinity, this is what's being debated right now on the collective. What is healthy masculinity? People aren't clear. And so if we're grappling with this collectively, how are people even going to know what to shoot for? And we don't have models of this. And so it's like, so as women who really long for and desire healthy masculine men, I'm just saying it's still kind of a work in progress out there.
Yeah.
Right. And women aren't perfect. Like I will admit that all day long, but
Yeah.
there's just a truth to the fact that sometimes, yeah, we can be attracted to men who maybe have more of the unhealthy or immature masculine traits. It's just kind of like the numbers when you look at it.
Well, and part of it's understanding, and then the wounding that I was talking about, right? So
Right.
like I know that, like, I've come across a couple of men who I feel at their heart they're good men, and I feel safe to a degree with them because I know they're not going to hurt me intentionally. So
Right.
I'm able to hold that space of love a little bit more for them. The replenishment part, that's something that's, I'm like, how do I get this for myself so then I can overflow into people, but I also want to overflow into the right person, which is something else I'm just figuring out about myself. But I know at the core, so it's just like that healing of the wound, and I don't know, breaking through that defensiveness. There's that potential right there.
Right.
And maybe where the feminine needs to lead a little bit. I also feel like there's men who are healthy masculine that can lead for the women to be more feminine. So
Right. In a perfect scenario, it would be, it's both actually, right? It's both.
yeah.
And I love that because, yes, to any of the men listening, like, we're not asking for perfection. Like, I'm very clear
Never.
that, like, I'm not perfect and I'm still doing the work until my last day. And so it's just a willingness to have a growth mentality, to be on the path, right, of doing inner work, of learning about how to heal, right, how to heal. And that's
And
the willingness and the like you said, the having the heart and knowing that you can feel into a person that they're a good person, they care about people. It's actually, on some level, it seems so basic, right? But this is kind of like we're having to, and we all do this, and we should do this
yeah.
probably even more than we do now, which is just like vetting a little bit more of people's character.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Taking the time, not rushing it, right? And
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
having the patience, which we don't have that because everything's so convenient nowadays, right? Like
Oh,
I can do my banking while I'm standing in line at the grocery store. Not necessarily recommended. Don't do it while driving.
well,
But
that's so true. It's like this kind of stuff does take commitment. It takes patience. It takes being able to turn towards each other rather than away. With the erosion of commitment and, even marriage and other things, it's like we're losing each other a little bit, right? And I'm not saying to really go back to the olden days, but it's like there is a third new way that's there for us. The good news is that I do see people like talking more about this, noticing that there's not a lot of staying power in relationships, and like, how can we rectify this? So I think that actually, I think there's a shift that's going to happen, like, and yeah, so
I
we'll see.
agree. Yeah, because I have been feeling and kind of expressing to people in my way, which is a more feeling way, so it's not always articulated, right? But I feel like there's a different way to do a lot of things, and almost you can like flip it on its head, and what you think it's going to be isn't what it's going to be. There's something else, and if we can tune into that for ourselves, that's the other thing. Sorry, too many thoughts at once. But if we can tune into that for ourselves about what the next right step is for our highest and best good and purpose, and we can take that path regardless of materially what's going on, then we can create a new reality, a new way of doing things that can help to evolve us, what, on a like social cultural level. I don't
Yes.
even know how to fully like.
Yes. And like, even if you just look at the realm of relationships, relationships are, I believe, one of the most powerful catalysts to evolve together. And so, like, thinking about all of the things that we talked about today, like, there's just so much and you and I love this stuff. Like, we love inner work, we're drawn to like Laura Bernhard's work and like all of
Yeah.
that. And so like, we love doing this. We love to grow and evolve into better versions of ourselves. Right. And hopefully most of the people listening are too. But gosh, I can't believe
And likely.
we've been talking for an hour, which is incredible. I mean, I could talk to you forever. We'll start to kind of wrap it up, but we'll go for a little bit longer. But if we think about, that just this overall topic of, as women, the importance of working with our inner masculine, do you have any sort of last thoughts, or maybe like for the women who might be listening who aren't like fully convinced or anything like that?
So for the women who are listening who aren't fully convinced that it's important to embody their divine masculine.
Yeah. Maybe they're hearing a lot of this, the talk about, well, you just need to be more feminine. You just need to be more feminine. And this is sort of like the last thing on their mind.
And I hear the noise and the speed. For me, I feel like in embodying more of my own divine masculine, I feel like I have retrieved parts of my soul that I had lost, maybe through trauma or circumstances, maybe even ancestrally. Mm-hmm. I just feel, and I mean, this is a goal of mine, right? I want to be who I really am. I want to show up as Katrina from my heart.
Right.
And I don't know why anybody else wouldn't want to. It's sort of like your question earlier. Why wouldn't somebody want to experience this? And this is how I've really found myself.
Oh, I love that so much. I love that so much. And I think part of it too is like tuning, like in terms of the noise that's out there, it's like turning it down to really just like get in touch with yourself. Like, what do I want? Like, what do I do, with clear eyes, looking at myself, where I'm at? Like, where do I want to go? There might be, I guess you could argue, sometimes I've thought about this, like that you could argue maybe there are some people who in this lifetime, maybe they're meant to be really, really in their feminine. Mm-hmm. The majority of the time. Maybe there's people who are meant to be really, really in their masculine, and that's just part of their development path. And then in future lifetimes, maybe it'll be more of an integration. Like sometimes I think about that. Maybe that's true, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day,
walking that path of being more passive, or walking that path of being more power hungry.
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
It could be
soul evolution, the evolutionary astrology type.
That's
work,
true.
right?
Yes. And the chart, and like, what is their birth chart, right? It's so funny. I didn't share this story yet, but Katrina and I initially connected because Laura Matsu knows both of our charts, and she told Katrina that our charts are almost exactly the same. And so I just love that so much. Our charts are I think we only have like a few different placements that are off, but Katrina and I are like very similar in so many ways, which I love. But
Yeah.
speaking about birth charts and like what your blueprint is, that does have a ton to do. Even the balance of like earth, air, fire, water, the elements in your chart can show
Yeah.
you. That's another way that you can see, oh my gosh, I have a lot of earth and water. Maybe that means I'm, skew more on the feminine versus if you have a lot of air and fire, maybe you more to the masculine, right? So these are
Maybe.
these are
And I super encourage that intuitive process of what do you really, oh, we're gonna get a tail in a second.
oh,
Excuse
so
me, sir.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, so I think sometimes like, people are probably it's all probably perfect at the end of the day, right? Because I get caught up in a lot of like, oh my gosh, we need to be here and come on, guys, like let's go this way. But people probably are on their own soul's evolution, and I just have to like take a moment to respect that, right?
Well, and then you also have tools that when they are, like they're ready and they're here, like the people watching or listening are here for a reason. So
That's true. Exactly. And so like the last thing that I'll just share before we'll wrap up is I think when you were sharing the last little bit about speaking to women about why this is important to you, and when you develop the inner masculine and feminine balance inside of you, it's much less likely that when you're out there, either consciously or unconsciously, attracting partners where you're seeking to pull something in from an act of desperation. And a lot of this is not conscious, right? But like if we really have like a void inside of us that we haven't developed, then when we're out there, we're going to be sort of pulling stuff in, and that doesn't always have a good outcome. It can lead to codependency and some of the other relationship dynamics that we spoke of earlier. At the same time, all of these are learning lessons and we can grow and evolve from them. So that's really good. But this is another reason that I'll just share with listeners why it's actually so important to do this work, is it can protect you from that kind of situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man.
And so if people want to actually, what I would like to share now to wrap up is, can people reach out to you if they have any questions about anything that you shared today?
They sure can.
Okay, good. All right, good. So I'll
I
put,
don't know where, but no, email is pretty much my main place.
okay, perfect. So in the show notes, if people want to contact you, they can just, they can reach out, they can email you with any comments or questions. And so just to kind of wrap everything up, do you have any final words or any thoughts that you want to share?
I don't know. I'm super happy to do this with you. It's very exciting and has helped me to integrate even more. So I appreciate you and your work very, very much.
Thank you
So
so much.
thank you for having me here. I think I've sort of went on a lot about how it's important for people to really tune into themselves and figure out what they need. I think I drove that one home a little bit, maybe not, but that's what I really want to share as well, is walk
Katrina,
your path, not other people's.
oh,
Yeah.
I love that so much. And my last words for you is that I'm just so excited to have you on and have this conversation, because I really, despite the fact that I love talking about things like this, I really don't. First of all, you're definitely the first woman that I've had on the podcast to talk about this, because I just actually don't know that many women who are interested in this. And it's fascinating. So I was just, remember when we had our call last, I was just so excited when you brought up this topic, and I invited you on right away because I really wanted to talk about this, and I think it's important.
I
And
think
even
so
though
too.
it's so important, and I've kind of done my own work around this, and I do help women to do this work, but it's funny because I don't really like advertise it as such. It just kind of comes in terms of my overall workings with people to bring them into greater balance.
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I'm so grateful that you shared all of your wisdom with us. And thank you for being so open.
Yeah.
And thanks again. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Leigh-Anne.
Okay, bye.